Creative Mind, Exploring the Art of Thinking by Forrest Kinney. Binary Thinking. Our various ways of thinking are like sets of tools, with each tool being suited to perform a particular task. A chef has a set of tools to perform tasks in the kitchen. A hairstylist has a different set. The most important thing to know about any tool is not only what it's to be used for, but what it's not to be used for. We need to know its limits. So a hammer can be used to pound or extract nails, but it never should be used to make a smoothie. There are much better tools for doing that. And it shouldn't be used to polish a car. Even the finest hammer in the world can't do that job as well as a polisher. Binary thinking is our most popular thinking tool. It's the hammer in the tool chest of the mind. We need to understand its nature and limits to use it well and use it creatively rather than destructively. Binary thinking reduces reality to two clearly defined states that are usually mutually exclusive. You can either be on or off, but not both at the same time. Black or white, left or right, outside or inside, clockwise or counterclockwise, yes or no, left or right, big or little, hot or cold, male or female, right or wrong, zeros or ones. Binary thinking can entrap us if we don't see its limits, if we don't see how it can't account for the complexities of reality or the endless diversity of life. So let's explore how binary thinking works and how it doesn't work. Much of reality is something like this spectrum of hues. What binary thinking does is reduce all these subtle gradations to just two states. And so the spectrum of hues is reduced to and labeled white and black. One of the many problems with this is that these two different shades are both called black, even though these two shades are much more alike. And these two shades are both called white, even though these two shades are much more alike. So the uniqueness of each shade is lost in this crude way of thinking. Here's another issue. In a binary structure, if you have black, then not black can only be white, when in reality it can be any of these colors and more. John Kennedy made a similar point when he said, "The absence of war is not peace." There are not just two states, war and peace, but endless shades of both, and many other states that couldn't even be considered along this spectrum. This kind of thinking leads us to an us-them mentality, which is unlikely to lead to creative solutions to problems. Here's how it works. Suppose the U.S. government has a point of view, and Germany's government has a different one. And these other countries share a point of view that is similar to each other, but different from both the U.S. and Germany. And so we could group the points of view like this. But binary thinking forces us into a simple distinction, and so it becomes us versus them. And we fail to see all the different points of view. So many of our problems originate in our desire to force reality into two categories, of black and white, or this and that, or to make people fit snugly into categories called liberal or conservative, or male or female, or to value our life experiences according to how they fit into two boxes labeled success or failure, or to try to put life's complexities into just two boxes called right or wrong. Most of our problems are because we don't see the limits of binary thinking. So if binary thinking is so removed from reality, why is it so popular? Well, it has a great advantage. It reduces the complexity of reality to just two states. Of course, its great disadvantage is that it reduces the complexities of reality to just two states. Another reason why binary thinking is so popular is that we human beings have a left side and a right side, so we favor what comes in pairs, what's symmetrical and balanced. We find symmetry to be beautiful. We also like things to be distinct and clear. We like it when there's an obvious contrast between foreground and background, and when differences between things are clearly apparent. But of course, reality is often much more of a gradient, and so we need thinking that not only sees the strong, distinct lines, but also sees the endless, subtle shades between them. I'm going to share 4 practices that can help us move beyond the narrow limits of binary thinking. The first thing we can do is be aware that we always have alternatives. Though it's quick and often convenient to divide the world cleanly in half, we can practice non-binary thinking. But you know, that name is not that good, because by dividing thinking into binary thinking and non-binary thinking, we're using binary thinking. So we could call it color thinking, since it often makes no sense to divide the world into black and white when it has infinite shades of color. So here are some examples of non-binary thinking. There are those that insist on framing differences of opinion as arguments with winners and losers. But that's rather crazy, because the way to find common ground is to explore that common ground together, to inquire, to communicate, to walk for a while in a meadow instead of turning that meadow into a field for a cutthroat soccer match. When we frame discussions with others as arguments with winners or losers, then we don't see how both people can come out winners. And we don't see that in war, both sides are losers. When we frame our life experiences as success or failures, we fail to see that often it is the troubled times which were absolutely necessary for the times of prosperity. As Walt Disney once said, "All my troubles and obstacles have strengthened me." You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you. Disney didn't narrowly frame his experiences in terms of success and failure. Instead of making these value judgments, he was curious about what could be learned from each experience. Another practice we can do is what I call spectral thinking. Whereas normal thinking is like this kind of light switch, spectral thinking is much more like this dimmer switch, able to create many shades of light. Whereas normal thinking is like these 2 faucets, spectral thinking is like this faucet. The main idea is that black and white, yin and yang, are not static and distinct, but in a constant state of flux, transforming in a gradual way between various states that are mixes of the 2 states. And so, when we think or say closed or open, the practice is to be aware that these words suggest many states, a spectrum between an absolute closed and an absolute open. When we use words like happy and sad, to simultaneously be aware that there are so many human emotions that we could crudely label this way. When we say front or back, to know that these terms really only work in a 2-dimensional world, and we live in a 3-dimensional world, with many degrees between front and back. There are many stages between start and finish, many elevations between high and low, or top and bottom, many sips between full and empty, and that day and night are not states, but a cycle of light and darkness that is always changing. Another practice that can quickly protect us from the dangers of binary thinking is what I call 3-term thinking. This is when, in response to a binary formulation, we bring in another term that keeps us from assuming that we have to think in mutually exclusive terms. Sometimes this is as simple as thinking of other mediating between 2 binary terms. I think 3-term thinking is particularly important when we use binary thinking to frame a situation in which we have a normal state in the middle and then 2 extremes on either side. We tend to call the middle state good and either extreme bad. The problem with this is that once we label both extremes bad, then we lose the distinction between them. Both extremes become bad. And this way of thinking keeps us from seeing that often we ought to be using 3-term thinking, such as bad, good, and better. For example, in a race, the people leading the pack are an extreme, but that is better than being in the middle. If we were to apply binary thinking here, we would be encouraging mediocrity, saying it's best to be in the middle of the pack, so don't get out in the lead. This sort of thinking can help explain the attitude behind a statement made by one of Beethoven's early composition teachers. Beethoven never has learned anything and never will. As a composer, he is hopeless. This teacher didn't see that Beethoven broke the rules not out of laziness or rebelliousness, but because he had something to say that didn't fit within the rules. A teacher of Einstein's later recalled that he was a lazy dog. By labeling Einstein as a bad student, they failed to realize that he was not at the end of the pack, but in the lead. And so we need three terms in many situations in life. Life is often like this bell curve. It doesn't work to call the two extremes bad, and it works much better with three terms: bad, good, and better. To impose binary thinking in these situations is to encourage mediocrity, not excellence. I'm reminded here of what the pioneer of modern dance once said about her art: the only sin is mediocrity. Another practice to counter the reality-denying effects of binary thinking is what I call relative thinking. Is this stick long or short? Well, we really can't say except by comparison with another stick. Oh, okay, so the stick is long and the new one is short. But wait, the stick could be short compared to this stick, which is long, or long compared to this stick, which is short. But the new stick could be long compared to the short stick. The original stick could be short compared to this long stick, which would be short compared to this long stick. Whoops, this changes everything, because now the long stick is short. To say this another way, this is light and this is dark. But this is dark, so that means this is light. So often what we call bad in one context might be good in another. Today's finish line is tomorrow's start line. It's the same line. Beethoven might consider his finished idea today to be more like a sketch tomorrow, a place to start all over again. In the apartment building of life, one person's floor is another person's ceiling. As Emerson said, the virtues of society are the vices of the saint. Someone once said, the good is the enemy of the best. If we stop at good and don't see that this can be less than a greater good, if we don't see the finish line as a place to start again, then we will never discover the best. And the practice of relative thinking will help us. A flexible mind will allow us to keep growing and creating. This video just starts the discussion about the limits of binary thinking and how to counteract its negative effects. You can continue the exploration in the videos called Both Neither, Crossing, and Balancing.